Let's talk about cellular respiration. There are two different things that we're going to talk about when we talk about cellular respiration. There are two different types, if you will, or ways to produce energy. Aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration, also known as fermentation. Aerobic respiration requires oxygen and happens in three stages: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the electron transport chain, and it's going to produce more overall ATP. So in this presentation, we're going to focus on glycolysis, and then you'll see other presentations that do the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. Anaerobic respiration is not going to require oxygen in order to make ATP, but it produces less ATP and happens in just one stage. Both of them, though, break down glucose to make ATP as the end product. So glucose is required for both. The overall reaction for aerobic respiration is as follows. You have the C6H12O6, okay, or the glucose, plus the oxygen, all right? Remember, these are the reactants, and glucose we're going to get from the food that we eat, all right, from breaking down starches, and we get oxygen from the air that we breathe. As a result, we're going to get ATP, which is our energy, carbon dioxide, and water. And the carbon dioxide and water are going to be considered wastes. We don't need those. So carbon dioxide is going to be later exhaled um, into the environment, and we have water. You can actually see this process when we respire. So let's look at the mitochondria where all this takes place. Here's your overall structure. We have the inner membrane, which is in here. Remember, this is a double membraned organelle. And we have the outer membrane, which is this kind of outer shell. Then we have the cristae, which is the folds of the inner membrane. And then the matrix, which is this liquid-filled space inside this inner folded membrane. The overall reaction, if we look at the mitochondria and the cytoplasm surrounding the mitochondria, we have lots of stuff going on. So glycolysis is going to happen in the cytoplasm. And glycolysis, glyco, sounding like glucose, and lysis, remember to cut or to break down, is going to be the breaking down of glucose. And that happens in the cytoplasm outside of the mitochondria. That's going to produce some ATP. Then the products of glycolysis, pyruvic acid is going to move into mitochondria for the Krebs cycle, and that will produce some ATP, and then eventually they move on to the electron transport chain. Looking at glycolysis, we take glucose, our 6 carbons, okay? We are going to break it down into 2 3-carbon compounds. In the process of doing that, as we break the bonds between this glucose, we're actually going to have to use 2 ATP here. And to break something down, you need some energy. So the cell is going to use, or the mitochondria will use 2 ATP, and in turn, it will form 2 ADP. So remember our photosynthesis lectures where ATP has those 3 phosphates, and that's a fully charged battery. And when it forms ADP, one of those phosphates is missing. It's only partially charged, but it can go back and pick some more phosphate up and become recharged. Then we have our 3-carbon compounds. And now we're going to modify them further and actually produce 4 ATP from this and 2 NADH. Now, NAD plus is another energy compound, and we're going to input 2 NAD plus molecules, and they're going to pick up 2 electrons because there's 2 molecules and become NADH. Now this is going to carry those electrons over to the electron transport chain later in the cycle. And then our overall end product is 2 pyruvic acid molecules. So in glycolysis, we have some pluses and negatives. We are going to release energy quickly and provide energy to the cells when oxygen is unavailable. But on the negative side, it only produces 2 ATP. So glycolysis is the breaking down of glucose as the initial step. It's going to break the glucose down into 2 pyruvic acid molecules. And if we look at this chart, we can see that it happens in the cytoplasm, and along with those 2 pyruvic acid molecules, we produce NADH, the electron carrier, and ATP. We're going to use 2 ATP though, and 4 are going to be produced altogether. So our net gain is really only 2 ATP. but the cell is getting some ATP, even though we didn't use any oxygen yet.